Ever seen a device specifically designed to bundle asparagus? Victorians had one. The 19th century saw an explosion of kitchen inventions. Victorian inventors believed every cooking task needed a specialized tool. Peeling an apple? There's a machine for that. Chopping meat? Here's a device that looks like a medieval torture instrument. These gadgets filled middle and upper-class kitchens, advertised in catalogs with bold claims about saving time and improving results. Most ended up forgotten in pantries after proving more trouble than they were worth. Let's explore the strangest kitchen gadgets Victorians actually used. Meat grinder. Victorian meat grinders were intimidating cast-iron devices that clamped to table edges. A hand crank pushed meat through a screw mechanism and out through a perforated plate, producing ground meat for sausages, pies, and terrines. Before these machines, cooks chopped meat by hand or pounded it in mortars. The mechanical grinder saved enormous time and produced more uniform results. The devices became kitchen standards by the 1870s. Butchers used larger versions, but household models appeared in middle-class kitchens for processing leftovers and making economical dishes from cheap cuts. The grinders came with multiple plates featuring different-sized holes. Fine grinding for smooth sausages, coarse grinding for textured pies. Operating the grinder required 2 people for best results, one to feed meat, another to turn the crank. The devices were dangerous. The screw mechanism had enough force to pull in fingers along with meat. Victorian newspapers occasionally reported injuries, leading to warnings in household guides about keeping hands clear. Cleaning meat grinders was miserable. Fat and meat scraps lodged everywhere. The device had to be completely disassembled, each piece scrubbed, then dried immediately to prevent rust. Despite the hassle, meat grinders remained essential kitchen equipment. Cherry pitter. Victorian cherry pitters were single-purpose devices designed exclusively for removing cherry stones. This level of specialization exemplified Victorian kitchen gadget obsession. The most common design held a cherry in a small cup. Pressing a lever drove a pointed rod through the cherry, pushing the stone out while the flesh remained in the cup. The devices made sense in context. Victorian families preserved cherries extensively: pies, preserves, wine. Processing pounds of cherries meant removing hundreds of stones by hand, a tedious process that stained fingers and crushed fruit. The pitters worked efficiently when properly adjusted. Too much pressure crushed the cherry to pulp. Too little left the stone partially attached. Manufacturers produced increasingly elaborate models. Some mounted to tables, others featured bowls to catch pitted cherries and separate bowls for stones. The most ambitious designs attempted automation with hand cranks and conveyor mechanisms. These elaborate models rarely worked as advertised. Conveyors jammed, mechanisms misaligned, sending cherries flying. Victorian Consumer Reports warned against the most complex cherry pitters. The devices exemplified Victorian kitchen gadget culture, specialized tools for specific seasonal tasks used intensively for a few weeks annually, then stored the rest of the year. The apple peeler. Victorian apple peelers were elaborate cast-iron contraptions that looked more complicated than necessary. A hand crank turned the apple against a fixed blade, while a second blade spiraled around, removing the peel in one continuous strip. The devices appeared in every hardware catalog by the 1870s. Multiple manufacturers competed with slightly different designs, each claiming superior efficiency. The appeal made sense given Victorian cooking. Apple pies, tarts, puddings, and preserves required processing enormous quantities of apples. Hand peeling a bushel took hours. The peeling machine promised dramatic time savings. The machines worked, producing neatly peeled apples at impressive speed. However, they required careful adjustment for different apple sizes. Too tight and the blade cut into flesh, wasting fruit. Too loose and peel remained attached. Cleaning the devices was terrible. Apple juice and peel lodged in every crevice. The cast iron rusted, if not dried, immediately. The machines also required specific apple types. Firm, round, consistently sized. Irregularly shaped apples jammed the mechanism. Despite limitations, apple peelers remained popular through the Victorian era. The time savings for large-scale preserving outweighed inconvenience. Many Victorian homes kept their peeler specifically for autumn preserving season. Mechanical butter churn. Victorian butter churns evolved from simple paddles into complex mechanical devices with gears, cranks, and elaborate internal mechanisms. Manufacturers advertised them as modern improvements over traditional methods. The basic principle remained the same: agitating cream until fat globules clumped together. Victorian innovations involved mechanisms to make this faster and require less physical effort. Some designs used rotating paddles inside a barrel, others employed plungers. The most elaborate models had multiple gears, converting hand cranking into complex internal motions, supposedly superior to simple agitation. Victorian advertisements claimed these churns produced better butter in less time with less effort. The reality varied considerably. Some worked well, others were disasters that produced inferior butter or broke after minimal use. Glass-windowed models let operators monitor the process without opening the churn, a genuinely useful feature that allowed precise timing. Cleaning mechanical churns presented challenges. Cream and butter residue stuck in gears and crevices. The internal mechanisms couldn't be easily accessed. Victorian dairy guides recommend disassembling churns weekly, a process that could take an hour. Middle-class households often purchased mechanical churns as status symbols as much as functional tools. Rotary egg beater. Before electric mixers, Victorians used rotary egg beaters, hand-cranked devices with two beaters connected to gears. Turn the crank, and the beaters spun rapidly, whipping eggs or cream far faster than whisking by hand. The invention revolutionized Victorian baking. Recipes began specifying beat until very light, or whip to stiff peaks. Instructions impractical without mechanical assistance. Victorian cakes became lighter once rotary beaters made incorporating large amounts of air feasible. The earliest models appeared in the 1850s and 1860s. By the 1880s, multiple competing designs filled catalogues. The Dover egg beater became the most popular American model, so common that Dover became synonymous with rotary beaters. The devices genuinely saved time. Whipping egg whites by hand for a large cake could take 20 minutes. A rotary beater reduced this to 5 minutes of relatively easy cranking. Problems arose from poor quality models. Cheap beaters had gears that slipped or broke. Victorian consumer guides warned against purchasing the cheapest models, recommending quality beaters that would last. Cleaning was tedious. Egg and cream residue stuck between gears and around beater wires. Cookbook authors suggested disassembling the beater after each use, though in practice many cooks simply rinsed them quickly. If you're still here after learning about Victorian egg beaters, subscribe for more bizarre kitchen history. Knife cleaner. Victorian knife cleaners addressed a problem modern kitchens don't have: carbon steel knives that stained badly and required constant polishing. The devices were cylinders filled with abrasive material. Insert the blade, turn a crank, and brushes or abrasive surfaces polished the blade bright. Some models held multiple knives simultaneously. The machines made sense given Victorian knife maintenance requirements. Carbon steel tarnished from contact with acidic foods. Proper Victorian household management required knives to shine. Hand polishing knives with abrasive powder took time, particularly in large households with dozens of knives. The mechanical cleaners promised to speed this process. The reality depended on the abrasive used. Good quality cleaners used fine pumice. Cheap models used overly aggressive abrasives that scratched blades and wore them down prematurely. Victorian household guides recommended knife cleaners for large households with extensive cutlery. Small households were advised to continue hand polishing. The introduction of stainless steel made knife cleaners obsolete almost overnight. Jelly mold brushes. Victorian jelly molds featured intricate designs with narrow crevices impossible to clean with standard brushes. Manufacturers responded with specialized mold brushes designed to reach every decorative detail. Victorian mold cleaning sets contained dozens of different brush shapes, thin brushes for narrow channels, angled brushes for corners, tiny brushes for delicate details. The elaboration reflected Victorian jelly culture. Elaborate molded jellies served as centerpieces at dinner parties. The more intricate the mold, the more impressive the presentation. Cleaning these molds thoroughly mattered for both appearance and safety. Jelly residue left in crevices led to tarnishing or mold growth that contaminated future jellies. The specialized brushes worked, but using them was time-consuming. Cleaning one elaborate mold could take 30 minutes of careful brushing, rinsing, and drying. Some mold designs were essentially uncleanable. The most elaborate decorative molds had crevices so narrow that even the thinnest brushes couldn't reach. The entire category represented Victorian domestic priorities. Elaborate presentation mattered enough to justify specialized cleaning tools and significant servant labor. Raisin seeder. Victorian raisin seeders removed seeds from raisins, another highly specialized single-purpose gadget. The devices featured spring-loaded mechanisms that gripped the raisin while small hooks pulled out seeds. The need for these devices highlights how different Victorian cooking was. Modern raisins are seedless varieties, but Victorian raisins contained seeds needing removal before use. Hand-seeding raisins was tedious. Recipes calling for a pound of seeded raisins meant picking seeds from hundreds of individual raisins. The mechanical seeders promised to speed the process. Most designs held the raisin while the operator pulled a lever or turned a crank, extracting seeds without crushing the fruit completely. The results were mixed. The seeders worked reasonably well on large, plump raisins, small or dried-out raisins crushed to paste. Victorian cookbook authors debated whether raisin seeders were worth the investment. Some recommended them enthusiastically, others suggested the machines cost more than they saved. The development of seedless raisin varieties made these gadgets obsolete. Nutmeg grater with storage. Victorian nutmeg graters were tiny, elaborate devices that combined a grater with a compartment for storing whole nutmegs. Some models were incredibly ornate, made from sterling silver with decorative engravings. The devices made practical sense. Nutmeg loses flavor quickly once ground. Victorian cooks preferred to grate nutmeg fresh as needed, rather than using pre-ground spice. Having the nutmegs and grater combined meant the tool was always ready when recipes called for fresh nutmeg. The most basic models were simple tin boxes with a grater on one side. More elaborate versions featured multiple compartments, mechanical grating mechanisms activated by cranks or levers, and catches to collect the grated nutmeg without spilling. Upper-class Victorian households owned ornate silver nutmeg graters that served as much for display as function. These appeared on dining tables so hosts could offer guests freshly grated nutmeg for punch, eggnog, or other beverages. The pocket-sized versions allowed Victorian gentlemen to carry nutmeg graters when traveling. Nutmeg enhanced various beverages and dishes, and having fresh nutmeg available marked someone as refined and prepared. The devices represented Victorian attention to detail in cooking. Rather than accepting pre-ground spices with diminished flavor, Victorian cooks invested in specialized graters to ensure optimal taste. Modern pre-ground spices and less elaborate cooking standards made these ornate graters unnecessary. Simple graters suffice for the occasional cook who wants fresh nutmeg, but the elaborate Victorian versions with storage compartments and decorative metalwork have become antiques rather than functional tools. Asparagus buncher. Victorian asparagus bunchers tied asparagus stalks into uniform bundles for cooking and serving. The devices featured adjustable clamps that held asparagus at precise measurements while the operator tied twine around them. This specialization reflects Victorian table standards. Asparagus bundles needed to be uniform, exactly the same diameter, perfectly aligned, tied at precisely spaced intervals. Presenting pearly bundled asparagus indicated sloppy household management. The bunches ensured consistency. Load asparagus into the device, tighten the clamp, tie the twine at marked intervals, release. Each bundle emerged identical. Professional kitchen supply catalogs featured multiple buncher models. Large households processing substantial asparagus invested in expensive commercial-grade bunchers. The devices exemplified Victorian domestic priorities that seem absurd now. The asparagus tasted the same, regardless of bundle uniformity, but presentation mattered enormously. Modern cooking abandoned this level of fussy presentation. The specialized bunching devices became obsolete when people stopped caring about millimeter-perfect vegetable presentation. Lemon squeezer with strainer. Victorian lemon squeezers were elaborate hinge devices made from cast iron or porcelain. The most complex models featured built-in strainers to catch seeds and pulp, producing perfectly clear lemon juice. The devices required significant hand strength. Place a halved lemon in the bottom cup, press down the top handle, and the lemon crushed between ridged surfaces. The juice ran through holes into a collection basin while the strainer caught unwanted solids. These weren't simple handheld reamers. Victorian lemon squeezers were substantial equipment, often mounted to countertops or table edges. They approached lemon juicing as a serious mechanical task. The elaborate models featured measuring marks on the collection basin. Some included multiple strainer screens with different fineness levels. The devices made sense for households using large quantities of lemon juice. Victorian cooking and cleaning both relied heavily on lemons. Cleaning the squeezers was moderately difficult. Lemon residue, seeds, and pulp stuck in every crevice. The cast iron models rusted unless dried immediately. The porcelain versions broke if dropped. Combination grater. Victorian combination graters attempted to consolidate multiple graters into single devices. Different sides featured different grating surfaces: fine, medium, and coarse grating, plus slicing blades. The concept made sense. Victorian kitchens accumulated numerous single-purpose graters for cheese, nutmeg, breadcrumbs, vegetables, and citrus zest. A combination tool promised to replace them all. The execution was problematic. The combination graters were large and awkward. Using the different sides required rotating the entire device and switching hand positions. The multifunctionality came at the cost of convenience. Cleaning combination graters was terrible. Food particles from different uses mixed together. Cheese residue contaminated the nutmeg side. Breadcrumbs stuck in the citrus zester. The devices needed thorough cleaning after each use to prevent flavor transfer, but their size and complexity made this difficult. Victorian cooks generally preferred specialized graters despite the storage space they required. A small dedicated nutmeg grater worked better than wrestling with a large combination device just to grate nutmeg. The devices exemplified Victorian gadget culture's downsides. The promise of consolidation and efficiency often produced tools that were actually less efficient than the simple items they replaced. Manufacturers marketed these as improvements, but practical experience revealed the flaws. Some Victorian household guides specifically warned against combination graters, recommending separate tools for different purposes. The theoretical space savings didn't justify the practical inconvenience. Victorian kitchens were museums of specialized gadgets, most designed for tasks we now consider too specific to need dedicated tools. Every cooking step had its machine, every preparation its specialized implement. Many of these devices worked as advertised. Others were solutions to problems nobody actually had, marketed successfully to status-conscious households. The Victorian gadget boom revealed both genuine innovation and absurd over-specialization. Which of these bizarre gadgets have you used before? Let me know in the comments. If you enjoyed this look at Victorian kitchen technology, subscribe for more stories about how people really cooked in the past. Thanks for watching.